Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Brad Rowe with Project Upgrade, and I got Johnny Casalena here with me again. So today we're going to talk about GI mapping. Johnny's going to bring us through a client's GI map, mine specifically, and kind of break things down and address certain issues that he's found on my results and kind of go about an approach of how we would fix my individual issues. And one of the things that he's going to stress the most is this is a very individualistic process. If you try to copy what someone else is doing, you could make this situation a hell of a lot worse. So Johnny's going to take the lead here and tell you guys how screwed up I am.
All right, cool. So we had discussed last time when we were going through your labs, you were saying, do you have any gut issues? You notice anything going on with your digestion? You're like, as a matter of fact, yeah, a lot. We went over a number of the symptoms you were having. So you can, if you want to go over some of the symptoms you're having, which could,
I mean, my whole life I've been dealing with, I was diagnosed with IBS as a kid, always fought severe diarrhea, constipation battles. But, over the last, 7 or 8 years at least, it's just been constant diarrhea, constant inflammation and bloating. And I just chalked it up to the IBS and, just something I was always going to have to deal with.
Right. So, which is where I came in. It was like, so IBS, it's not that it's not a thing, but it's a blanket statement that I'd say is used very commonly in conventional medicine for, you have a gut problem, we don't know what the hell it is. Now, generally, if you dig a little deeper, you can find out exactly what it is. So I had mentioned to Brad, I was like, why don't we do a GI map? Let's see exactly what's going on in the gut, because there's a number of things, many gut issues have the same symptoms. Okay. So if you don't test and you just decide to throw a protocol at it, like some blanket cookie cutter protocol, it's like, oh yeah, they have symptoms of, for example, SIBO, and I'm going to throw that directly at it and hope it works. The problem is, let's say that there were no pathogens, or let's say there was no opportunistic bacterial overgrowth, which is commonly associated with SIBO. And let's say that wasn't the case. And then let's say all of the commensal bacteria, let's say all of that was super low. Well, if you go and throw a traditional, what's deemed as a kill phase, right? That's the common, terminology for it. Not to say that you shouldn't remove in some cases, but if you were to do that in that case, you're just making the situation 1,000 times worse, because the person already doesn't have enough beneficial bacteria and there's no overgrowth of any bad bacteria. So if you do a kill phase, you're just crushing everything super low. And then now you're in a way worse predicament. And in that case, most of the time, which we'll just show a couple of the things on the GI map when we open it up. Let's say all of those bacteria are super low, those commensal bacteria or the potentially beneficial bacteria. And let's say that's the case. Oftentimes when you see that, you also will see a very low secretory IgA, which is basically your immune system. So now if you crush all that down and then you are putting, this intense type of protocol into a situation that's already vulnerable, now you're opening up hell's gates, right? So you're putting yourself at a lot of risk. So essentially you would want to go about that process way differently than a case that it actually was an overgrowth, where a kill phase would potentially be the approach you would take to start. So let's just open yours up and go over your unique scenario, and then we will go from there. So let's you have it turned on for the screen?
Yep.
All right. So this is your test. So good news here is no pathogens present, right? So you don't have any of the bacterial pathogens, you don't have any of the parasitic pathogens, and you don't have any viral pathogens. All very good news. A lot of the times the people that have these, which I was actually concerned that you may, based off of what you were telling me was going on, some of what you were telling me initially on our previous call, I was worried that you possibly had Giardia, because you had a lot of the symptoms that are associated with when that's present. In my experience,
been there before. Trust me, I know what Giardia is. Yeah, that's terrible.
So I've had people that had it and were explaining a lot of the symptoms they had to me. And, when they came to me, and then when you were saying it, I was like, I hope the hell not. So
27 pounds at the end of an off season because I got Giardia and we just could not figure it out. Doctors were just totally baffled, couldn't figure it out. And luckily I had a client who's a functional health coach, and he gave me a protocol that he created, this supplement, and we killed it off in like 2 weeks.
Yeah, perfect. So, definitely good that that's not there. All right. Yeah. So as we go down, we do see that you have an H. pylori infection. It's not crazy, but it's there. And some of what the H. pylori can do is create a circumstance of low stomach acid. When we know we have low stomach acid or hypochlorhydria, this is when you're going to have some decreased digestive function. You're not going to be able to digest your food as well, and then that's going to lead to a whole slew of symptoms, hence a lot of the symptoms that you have. Now, what's commonly associated with that as well, a lot of times people will have pretty severe acid reflux and things like that in this case, because we all, I shouldn't say we all know, but very commonly acid reflux is actually not from too much stomach acid, it's from not enough.
Right.
So, to quickly kind of go over that, basically you have your esophageal sphincter. At the bottom of it, it's pressurized, right? So, both ways. So when there's food going down, if there's food going down, the flap opens up, food goes down. And I'm going to go through this super quick because I'm not going to explain the entire process, but basically, when you don't have enough acid, when the food goes down and it drops through the esophagus, now it's obviously in your stomach. When there's not enough gastric juices and stomach acid to help digest it, basically the food is then sitting in and not digesting properly, and therefore it's going to start to build up gas. It's going to start to produce gas because now it's like growing and building some microbes that are gas producing. And then essentially what happens is that gas produces pressure, and then that little bit of acid that you do have spews up, and then it goes into the esophagus and then causes that painful reflux. Mm-hmm. So having proper acidity and proper digestive function obviously avoids that from happening. Now, it's important to say that some people that have H. pylori are asymptomatic, or they're asymptomatic in what they believe are to be the symptoms of it, which is generally like, oh, H. pylori, the person has reflux. If they don't have reflux, it must not be a problem. Again, not necessarily the case, because low stomach acid can present in a lot of other digestive dysfunctions. So we need to look at it beyond that. Again, you don't have any factors, which is excellent, which basically, we would have more worry that something, you would have some pathology or become more problematic in the future, or a more serious issue. It's not there. So again, good to see, but we do want to eradicate that H. pylori. But all right, let's just continue further down here. And
you keep scrolling. I grab my charger. Yep. One of those fun mornings where nothing works right. The internet wasn't working, so I moved to a different room. Then my laptop's dying. We're good. We're good.
All right. So here we got the commensal bacteria. Well, I'll go over this now because a lot of times people confuse this stuff. So commensal is commonly, people will also call it beneficial. And then opportunistic is also, referred to as like bad. Yeah. Neither of which are true. Okay. Generally speaking, if we're going like an overview, yes, that is true. But it's not necessarily like inherently good or bad either way. It's more so like what specifics are there, where they are in terms of like their balance, and looking at that. So I just wanted to bring that up here. But again, we'll see this commensal, and we see that you do have some low flags here. Some of the stuff there where you're not low, you're actually pretty sufficient. So where we are low, you could individually look up each of these microbes and be like, what do they do? And it gets really into it. And I get into that a little bit, like when I do when I'm mentoring somebody and I'm teaching them, really how to truly interpret these tests. But for the purposes of consult and reviewing what we're doing, I'm basically going like an overview here. And basically where you're flagging low, we have some insufficient beneficial bacteria that's likely here. And then we have also reduced mucosal function, right? So, your mucosal barrier probably not as good as it could be. So again, matches up pretty much with symptoms that you've explained. As we get a little bit further down here, we have the bacteria phyla. So this is broken down between Bacteroidetes and Firmicutes. So you actually don't have a bad ratio. Okay, so the bad ratio would be if it was essentially the opposite. So let's say the Bacteroidetes was super low and your Firmicutes were very high. We would have a lot more to worry about in a sense. But for you, the Bacteroidetes just being high essentially is just going to indicate that we have digestive dysfunction, right? So again, your digestion's not intact fully, which we know based off of things we've already gone over. Going down further here, we are going into the opportunistic microbes. So we see that we have 2 high flags here, right? And we know that they're pretty much going to be associated, again, decreased digestive function. We're going to see some inflammation. We're going to see maybe some diarrhea, constipation, and or likely. So to be clear, this test is not a SIBO test, but you can have some probability when you're looking at it with certain things that, often correlate with SIBO. So you can say without doing a SIBO test, is it probable? And based off of what we're seeing, the answer would probably be yes. So, and then this one here, just other overgrowth microbes. So you'll see here, so this is a methane producing bacteria, and that's obviously flagging high. And that's also tends to flag high in certain types of SIBO. Okay. So that's also correlates to some digestive dysfunction. So we know that your dysbiosis pattern is most associated with digestive dysfunction dysbiosis. There's 3 main patterns. A lot of times there's overlapping, but they're put in categories. So there's digestive dysfunction dysbiosis, insufficiency dysbiosis, and inflammatory dysbiosis. That's not to say that you can't have certain characteristics overlapping. So you could have, you're primarily showing digestive dysfunction. That's what I'm just getting at. So mostly we know that that's your main pattern of dysbiosis. As we move forward through it, I would much rather not see Candida register. So we are seeing it here. This is not alarming, but it's there. So a lot of times, like when I see that, I do want to make sure that we're being proactive in our approach when we go to fix things, to not let that become a problem, right? So I did address that in your approach as well with everything else that we have. Next, we want to go to your intestinal markers. So we see that your elastase 1 is low. So, again, digestive dysfunction here. We know there's some pancreatic insufficiency and hypochlorhydria, or the insufficient or low stomach acid. So like I had an idea that was the case before. So that wasn't necessarily surprising. We know that obviously we do need to replace or support that. Moving forward, how I was speaking earlier about the secretory IgA being that immune system. So yours, again, we did start the mega IgG a little bit ago. So that is the way that you can, improve that immune response by supplementing that in. So I do have a feeling that prior this could have been lower, and it's starting to get into a good range. I personally like to see it more so like closer to the middle here. Essentially, that's where I would say like is optimal, right? We're not particularly low by any means, but I think it's important to keep what we have for the length of time that we have it. just to keep that support up, especially while we're, going to go through a whole protocol to adjust and fix everything here.
Mhm.
But again, so when you see this really low, that's a good sign that the person's immune system's severely compromised. And then all of those other things that we went through above are more likely to be problematic. So you're more likely to have those parasitic infections. You're more likely to have those pathogens. You're more likely to have higher opportunistic overgrowth. You're more likely to have not enough commensal bacteria. All of that comes into play there. So we definitely want to make sure that that immunity is supported very, very well. So that way you're protected. Now, another thing to also look at, just, for future reference, just for you. So, which I think we went over before. So it kind of works like this with a lot of your body systems. So I'll explain it. So it's actually pretty relatable, but let's say you were to see this really, really high. That does not necessarily mean your immune function is functioning super well. That would mean that it's turned up all the way and your body's really fighting to keep you strong or keep you protected. And eventually, before it gets really low, it was probably already there. Right. So if somebody has really low, they were probably already there. And how does that correlate into other functional things we've spoken about in the past? What happens when somebody's really stressed? Cortisol goes up, right? And then it stays up. Let's say that pattern starts to go up and it stays high. Now, eventually, the body can't keep up with pumping out cortisol like that. And eventually it drops, they flatline, and now they have adrenal insufficiency. Depending on what phase of that they're in is different. But right. So high and then drops. Same thing when you're having insulin resistance. That insulin, your body's producing more to make up for the ineffective insulin. So your pancreas pushing out more, that level's going up. Eventually, those beta cells can't produce it anymore. And then what happens? Drops to super low insulin. Now they have type 2 diabetes. So same idea. Your body kind of has these safety mechanisms in place. But if you don't check them and don't know, you don't know where to address something. And it's always better to be proactive and prevent it from getting there. Or if you notice it becoming problematic, address it before it gets to that next stage. Because the further it gets into the worsening stages, the harder it is to correct. So just something I just wanted to bring up. I think it's important, for people to know. On yours, this is not a factor here, but this is your anti-gliadin IgA. Now, a lot of times when somebody has a negative reaction to, say, gluten or even cross reactives of gluten, this will be high, right? So that's when you're going to know, all right, we need to remove gluten pretty much immediately, especially for them, because it's even more inflammatory to those people. So you're not showing that, just bringing it up. Going down, again, I don't love to see calprotectin showing any inflammation, but there's nothing here that I'm seeing that's showing like an acute issue, saying like, okay, there's probability that there's a number of the things that would indicate if it was flagging high. But we know that there's some inflammation present based off of what we have going on and your body's response to the things that you're dealing with. So I'm not necessarily surprised to see, even though it's a minor elevation, some elevation. Next, and lastly on here is that zonulin. And as I mentioned earlier, this changes pretty much constantly. These levels, change nonstop. So I like to look at it in a sense. I just noticed in all of the cases that I worked with, I personally just don't like to see it over 100, because it tells me if it's over 100, there's at least some degree of gut permeability. And therefore, we don't know that, because it's a snapshot when you did this test. So, we could look at this an hour later and that might have been 180, right? So we don't necessarily know, but if I start to see it even like wherever it's at, if I'm seeing it above 100, I'm generally just assuming that there is some permeability in the equation. And as I mentioned before, even without the testing, some things that I am comfortable with starting prior to testing is supporting your your gut lining, your mucosal barrier, things that just overall support that. Because I never think that that's a bad idea. Just as I mentioned earlier, like I don't think it's ever a bad idea to support your liver, seeing that it has over 500 functions. It's not going to be a bad idea to help support it do its job. So again, same idea. I don't think it's a bad idea to, especially if somebody's symptomatic, I don't think you're ever going to hurt them by helping with that mucosal barrier function. Other things are more so like you don't want to add into an equation before you know, because again, that's where you could really make things worse for somebody if you don't know, what you're doing. In my notes I sent to you, basically what I put in here is the 5R protocol necessary. And I said the protocol. So a lot of times people believe this 5R protocol is I suppose they believe it's a specific cookie cutter protocol that you use in every case of gut dysfunction. And that really couldn't be further from the truth. It's just basically what it stands for, obviously, is remove, replace, reinoculate, repair, and rebalance, all of which need to be done. The order of which and how you go about unique approaches to doing that are highly individual based off of each person's scenario, kind of like how we went over earlier. So for you, I basically created the protocol to go over your individual case. And part of that is addressing the H. pylori, part of it. And part of doing that is eradicating H. pylori. And also while doing that, and the good part is we already started some of these things before we had started prior to even getting this, supporting the mucosal barrier, the gut lining. So we're going to basically continue that, but the supplements have been adjusted and the dosages have been adjusted based off of what, the findings here. So we basically are going to go through that, get that stuff set, make sure that we have that all in a good place, improving your digestion overall to begin and kind of soothe the gut a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then upon that point, begin a specific eradication protocol for you. And part of that's going to be the H. pylori, part of that's going to be the opportunistic bacterial overgrowth. And we have a specific antimicrobial approach to that. And then also utilizing a detoxification process, basically is adding in a binder, which can help to eliminate the toxins as you kill this all off, which, prevents a lot of other issues and can help to prevent certain times when you have like a kill phase, people will get what's called a Herx reaction or a Herxheimer reaction, where it's almost like basically an allergic reaction. And so part of that can help to avoid that. And then as we get further through that process, we begin adjusting what we're doing currently with probiotics and then implement a different probiotic that's going to provide you with what's called S. boulardii. And that's going to help as we're reinoculating, putting that in first, which is going to help to get things balanced in a better way. We're going to use that short term, and then we're going to go back to, so that's going to be approximately 5 weeks that we're using that specific probiotic. And then we're going to move back to the other probiotic that we were using previously and kind of move with that one forward. And then at that point, which is again, a little bit later in this protocol, that's when we're going to implement the betaine, which I explained, when we were speaking earlier, why I put it in a little bit later in the equation. I don't put it in right away, even though H. pylori being, and knowing that you have low stomach acid, the reason how that correlates to H. pylori is why I don't put it in right away, obviously. And again, there's a lot of different schools of thought on that and how people go about it. I've found it to work the best for most people by doing it this way and then adding that back later towards when we would say is either eradicated or mostly eradicated, and then plugging it in. And again, there's a lot of schools of thought. I feel that works best. I kind of explained it a little bit to you, which, if I'm, doing, again, if I'm doing like mentorship with people, I deep dive into why that makes sense. But again, that's my belief. That's what I see works the best in terms of, on paper, all these protocols, this stuff's fairly new, right? So like all of these protocols that people are saying, this is correct, this is correct. Sure, that might work, but like as time goes on, you find out there's multiple ways to skin a cat for everything. So to say somebody's like right or wrong is not, I would never speak in absolutes and tell somebody they're wrong with something, especially if, they've seen it work. Now, a lot of the cases that I've worked through, and I've done it other ways, as I've been learning over the years, and then I've changed it. I've tweaked my protocols to, see what ends up working for people. And that's why I have that belief, because the evidence shows it. So right. Maybe it doesn't show that on paper in every single study that's been done. But if I've seen it repetitively work time and again, then, that gives me the proof that I need that people. And again, this is stuff is in comparison to other things, this stuff, with the gut, and the more that we're learning about the gut, which, it's constantly evolving, you're still learning and finding new things that make sense. And, you end up getting better and better at what you do. If you don't evolve, then, you're probably never going to be that great.
Right.
And if you wait for a study to tell you this is the way to do it, you're probably always going to be behind the eight ball, because you're waiting for somebody else to tell you that what you found out is okay.
Right. Yeah.
So that's that. And then basically the other notes that I made for you, which we can go into, in more detail on our own, but I wanted you temporarily to utilize a lower FODMAP diet. And again, I'm going to emphasize temporarily. And then also temporarily lower carb, higher healthy fats. Again, temporarily. And that all obviously changes as you work through the process and then start adding these things back in, which that will be some clue there. If you're a practitioner, you're a coach, and you're somebody who's doing this, and you're giving somebody, let's say somebody has a SIBO and you're giving them a low FODMAP approach, don't think that you're doing that indefinitely, because that's not good either. And it's not necessarily going to help things if you think that that's long-term the way that the person needs to continue. So just put that little nugget out there, because that's actually pretty important.
Yeah. I'm excited for some change. I'm excited to, one of the things that, because of what I've been dealing with for years, is I adapted a fasting lifestyle, kind of like a nomad diet, where I eat once at night, because it's like I eat and I go to bed, and whatever digestive issues I deal with, I'm sleeping. And that's how I've been able to tolerate it. Whenever I eat during the day, I feel sluggish. Like it's just like I want to sleep immediately. I feel bloated. I can't function. So that's kind of why I've adopted this, nomad diet, where it's like I eat, then I go directly to bed, and whatever the hell happens. I'm sleeping, and
yeah,
I don't have to.
I mean, it's unfortunate, because like I said, I don't want you to live that way. So, right. And seeing that you've been dealing with this for so long, I'd say, just like with anything, I mean, the longer you've been dealing with something, the longer it could take to ultimately fix it. So I always tell people, like with anything that's like worth anything, it doesn't happen overnight. We're not going to expect like, hey man, we started this protocol and 3 or 4 weeks from now, everything's perfect. No, that's not necessarily realistic. Seeing as long as you've been dealing with it, I'm glad to see that things were not worse. Right. In terms of like, not to downplay your symptoms, right, that's there, but I'm glad to see that, there wasn't so much there. But I think it's because, which this is the last thing I wanted to touch on, I think it's because you do have an overall very healthy lifestyle. I think you do a lot of things, whether it's been in more recent years or not, but you are doing things to manage stress properly. You're having your healthy activity. You're doing all these things. You're supporting the liver. You're detoxing your body very well. All of which is imperative, which I tell to a lot of people who are coming to me for these, functional gut issues. I can create this plan for you to fix this problem. But what I always tell them straight from the beginning is the most important aspect beyond this protocol is you need to absolutely make sure that you are consistent and regular with a stress management routine, whatever that means for you. Right. So would I love everybody to meditate? Yes. Is it everybody's thing? No. Can I make everybody do that? Probably not. Some people, whether they don't want to or don't know how to, I don't know, but maybe that's not their thing, but they have to find another outlet for them. And that outlet is not training. Not that training is not a good outlet in general, but it is a stressor. Right. So it still increases your allostatic load. So it's an acute stress, which is generally good. But if you already have a peaked allostatic load, more training isn't necessarily your answer. So more so like a non-exercise stress management routine in place daily. If you are to really do that, change your patterns, your habits and really implement that, and you do that long-term, especially upon starting the protocol here, like making the changes across the board, that's what's going to lead to lasting change. And then these issues here not being chronic, right? Because things like SIBO and things like, gut permeability, AKA leaky gut, all of these things are chronic for a lot of people because they jump from coach to coach or they do these protocols. And that's the only thing that they do, but nobody advised them, or maybe they weren't ready to hear it to address their stress management. So therefore the stress is there, which is essentially the real root. And then it comes right back. So then it's like, oh, that didn't work. Well, the protocol, if the person knows what they're doing, it probably worked. It just, the other 50% of the equation wasn't there. So, it's like
walking in a gym and training as hard as you can, but you go home and eat McDonald's and you wonder why your body isn't going to change. It's the other aspects that we have to put into it. And I know that's one of my biggest downfalls is I'm a go person, and I train too much. Lately I've been doing 2 hot yoga classes a day, plus working out, plus 30 minutes of cardio. So I'm constantly stressing my body. And even though I'm able to manage stress in other areas because I do meditate, I do breath work and things like that, I'm stressing my body because I'm pushing it physically all the time, and I don't know how to back off.
So what I would just go to is like, because I always like to find out the whys for people.
Yeah.
So I'd be like, what makes you feel that you have to do that?
I'm at a point right now in my life where things are kind of slow and it keeps me busy. And so instead of like sitting around the house and feeling like I'm not achieving anything, I'm moving.
Gotcha. So there's a couple of things. One, I'd say a lot of people from our world are afraid to not work out because they're afraid to not look a certain way. Yeah. So they think doing more. And oftentimes when you pull them back a little bit, they end up looking better because their body's less stressed.
Yeah.
But then on the other side of where you're at, I completely relate to that, because for the longest period of time, and I still struggle with it, I have the hardest time relaxing because I feel that if I'm not exactly where I want to be in life yet, I better be doing something in those moments that I'm not working. I better be doing something to get to the level I'm trying to be at.
Yeah.
And I have a very hard time just being like, oh yeah, I mean, I sit with my wife and watch a movie, and then I'm like, the whole time sitting there, I'm like,
well, I'm a piece of shit.
Right. So if I was, working towards something, then I would be in a better scenario. Then I came to find about a year ago, actually, it's like a year ago right now. I took the first vacation I've ever went on in 12 or 13 years that I did not work. I took the weekend. I've never done that in my life, ever.
Yeah.
And I just unplugged and just checked out. And it was probably the best week of my life. But when I came back, I was so recharged.
Right.
I was 1,000 times more efficient at everything that I was doing. And then I found that I achieved my goals. I got done everything I wanted to do and still had time to enjoy life and enjoy myself. And then that's what kind of proved to me, like, dude, you do have to make time for yourself. And sometimes doing nothing is doing something.
Right.
And I think it's hard to, when you have like your personality type seems very similar to mine, it's very hard to do that and accept it. But a lot of times, like when you do, you realize like how much better you actually can be when you do allow that to happen.
Right. And that's that I feel like literally the last year, 18 months of my life, this is what the universe is like trying to force upon me. It's like I went from working 100 hours a week, just being nonstop because that's all I've ever done. That's all I've ever known. And then all of a sudden things got taken away for certain different reasons. And I just can't sit there. I'm lazy. I'm not doing anything, especially right now in my life. It's like, I'm not where I want to be, but I don't have this direction. But like, I'm learning to embrace this season and just be like, it's okay. You've done so much in your life to this point. It's okay to have this phase right now where it's just like, all right, if you want to watch a Netflix series, like, don't beat yourself up because you watched 45 minutes or an hour of TV at night. And that's where I'm trying to get to. So, it's part of that stress management, started that acceptance of yourself and everything. And we always want more and always pushing for more, but how can you find gratitude and be grateful for where you're at in this moment?
The good things that you have, grateful for everything you have, everything that's positive in your life. And obviously anybody with the mentality of like wanting to level up, I don't think anybody is ever going to be content, no matter where you get to, because I had tons of different, goals, whether they be financial or whatever. And every time I've achieved it,
what's next?
Well, I got to go up again. Right. And then I still never felt like, okay, this is good enough.
Right.
And I don't think I think if you learn to embrace that properly, that's not a bad thing, right? That just, if you're not settling, right, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but like allowing yourself to say, I do need some personal time to check out and it's okay for me to do that.
Yeah.
That's more like that balance. Like I wouldn't want to have a personality traits of somebody who doesn't want to aim to succeed or level up. Right. I wouldn't want that. So I would never want to train my brain to be that person, but I also want to train my brain to be okay with allowing myself time off and time to relax when it's appropriate.
Yeah. We'll get there. Well, Johnny, thank you again. This was an amazing, informative podcast, and I'm excited to see what else kind of information we can get from you in the future. Again, awesome. If you guys are looking for any type of functional health coaching, Johnny is an amazing coach, ProFx. Go to his site. You can book consultations. You can get blood work ordered, GI map ordered, everything to get you feeling and functioning properly.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
All right, brother. I appreciate you.
You too.